Moments with Mark chapter 8, starting with verse 14. Jesus talking about the yeast or the leaven of Pharisees. But the disciples had forgotten to bring any food, so they only had one loaf of bread with them in the boat. As they were crossing the lake, Jesus warned them, "Watch out. Beware of the yeast or the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod." The yeast or the leaven of Pharisees that Jesus is talking about is the Pharisees were the religious leaders of Jesus' day, the clergy, you might say. And they were hypocritical. They were just acting a part. They tried to be holy and religious on the outside, but inside their motives and their intents of their heart were not godly. And so Jesus is calling this the yeast or the leaven of the Pharisees. What he means by that is that hypocrisy and this acting a part but not having the reality in our heart, their influence can be a bad influence. It also is dealing with not only hypocrisy, but also with compromise. Compromising the standards of faith and holiness and godliness. The Pharisees, as well as Herod, had hypocrisy about them that compromised their faith in God, their trust in God. At this, they began to argue with each other because they hadn't brought any bread. Jesus knew what they were saying, so he said, "Why are you arguing about having no bread? Don't you know or understand even yet? Are your hearts too hard to take it in? You have eyes, can't you see? You have ears, can't you hear? Don't you remember anything at all? When I fed the 5,000 with 5 loaves of bread, how many baskets of leftovers did you pick up afterward? 12, they said. And when I fed the 4,000 with 7 loaves, how many large baskets of leftovers did you pick up? 7, they said. Don't you understand yet? He asked them. So he's using the feeding of the crowds, the 5,000 as well as the 4,000, as an object lesson of faith and trust. And so we have in this passage, Mark chapter 8, the idea that Jesus is saying, be careful of the hypocrisy of the religious leaders of our day. Now we notice that these disciples are wondering what's going on here. They're not quite catching it from Jesus. And so they're flawed followers of Jesus. But aren't we all flawed followers of Jesus? Sometimes we don't get it. Sometimes it doesn't get through our thick skull. And so Jesus is wonderfully patient and kind with us, merciful, and he keeps teaching us. He keeps being patient with us. He keeps having mercy with us. Flawed disciples are not necessarily hypocritical disciples. Let me say that again. Flawed followers are not necessarily hypocritical followers. It's a matter of the heart, isn't it? What does God see in our heart? What's our intents? What's our motives? And so Jesus talking about the Pharisees and Herod, saying they are hypocritical and compromising. And then Jesus talking to his own followers who are still on a learning curve. And he tells them, listen, you don't get it yet? I'm going to have to keep teaching you. Thank God that he keeps teaching us, right? God bless you today.